Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Political Vigilante on the modern money theory tutorial that I am going through with Jeff Epstein from Citizens Media TV. If you watched part one of this, please watch part one before you watch part two. Is very critical. So Jeff, it's some people who it's been a while since they watched part one. Let's say, just give us a quick recap on what we covered in part one of this video.
Well, if you wouldn't mind, if you give it from your point of view, and then I'll fill in the blanks.
Okay, that's great. So what Jeff explained to me, we did a couple hypotheticals of the big one, though. The big takeaway is, let's say there was the Pony Act of 2018, where everybody wanted the federal government said we're going to spend $10 billion to give every American, 320 million plus people, their own pony, and we started to realize that we have the money to do that, but there's all these other resources we would need: blacksmiths, veterinarians, food, all this stuff. And so fencing, all of these physical products that would need to be created and distributed. There's not enough ponies. There's only 500,000 ponies in America. These are hypothetical numbers, obviously. But there are 320 million people. That's a pretty real number. So it would take 5 to 10 years to breed 320 million ponies, to put the infrastructure in place and all of that. And then you also...
And let me add to that, if I may, training people, because we're going to need a lot more labor. And most, not importantly, but most unusual is time. That we can't do it in a week, which would cause inflation, but we can do it in 5 to 10 years.
5 to 10 years. And yeah, I mean, we're going to need more truck drivers to drive the feed around, and the medical supplies and all this stuff, and the fencing. Like, there's just going to be a millions of jobs and a big infrastructure logistical undertaking to get this done in 5 to 10 years. So it's not about the money, it's about the physical resources and the time. And then you pointed out that you asked me where money came from, and we got to the conclusion that it came from the Federal Reserve, which is controlled by the United States Treasury, which is controlled by Congress. So basically, Congress creates its currency. So then you propose this big explosion of a question. So if Congress can write its own currency, why would it need any revenue? Why would it need tax revenue? Why would it need to borrow money? Why would it need any of those things? And then we needed to take a break so that I could put ice on my skull to figure out why this happened. So now that's sort of catching everybody up. So let's now get into the answers to those massive questions.
Okay, so again, thank you so much for having me. You reach so many people, and this is important, not to just teach you, but to teach everyone that you watch. So thank you.
Well, I appreciate you being on the show, because the purpose of this show, for anyone who's finding this show for the first time, what Political Vigilante is I want to educate people. I want people to wake up to the world that we're living in. We've all been fed a lot of propaganda Kool-Aid from... the two parties are so different from one another, to the media is all, it's nonsense. It's all the same, in my opinion. There's one party, they're all for banking and war and all that other stuff. And anyway, that's what the point of this channel is to get people to open their minds up. And I like to be open up to it, which is when you approach me about, hey, Graham, I would love to come on your show and teach you MMT. I'm like, let's do it, because I like talking about subjects that the corporate media won't talk about, which there's no way in hell they're going to talk about this. And I want this show to educate and inform, and hopefully it's a little bit entertaining to watch. It's not boring. So.
Okay. All right. So let me just add a couple things before we go on, which is, you got to watch part one. There's just no way you can. But productive capacity, real resources, you said. You can't put money, the Congress can create as much money as it wants, whenever it wants, for whatever it wants, and it's the only one that can do it. But that doesn't mean that you shouldn't be responsible about it. We talked about the ponies. You can't do it in a week. That would cause insane inflation. You can do it in 5 to 10 years, because that considers the real resources, that considers the productive capacity. So I just want to remind people of two definitions, and then we'll go on, which is, and actually the phrase I'll say, the United States government, the federal government, the Congress specifically, is the monopoly currency issuer. Everybody else, people, states, companies, municipalities, cities, other countries, China, Russia, all of them are currency users. They're not allowed to create it.
And real quick, every country is the creator of its currency. Like the Chinese currency, the Chinese government are the only ones allowed to create it.
Well, it depends on the currency. I don't know about China specifically, but fiat currencies. We are a fiat currency. The EU is not. The country, well, the EU is, but not the countries in the EU. The EU countries are all hooked into, are required to use the EU dollar or whatever it's called, the euro.
Explain what a fiat currency is.
We actually had, that's exactly what we've been talking about. They get to create the money as much as they want, whenever they want, for whatever they want, and they're the only ones that are allowed to do it. And it is not backed by anything physical. It's not backed by gold. And that is what changed. It used to be backed by gold before August of 1971. It is no longer backed by gold since Nixon changed that in August of 1971. So a fiat currency can create its own money and all that stuff, and it's not backed by anything. Canada, Australia, Japan, England, I think New Zealand, I don't know about China, they're all fiat currencies. The euro is a fiat currency, but all the countries that use it, they're users. They're just like our states. They use the euro. They can't create it. That's why Greece is in such a hard spot.
And so when it was backed by gold, so it was basically, we have, what, I'll just pick a random number. We have $1 trillion in gold, so therefore we have $1 trillion in paper currency.
Right, and if you create more, if you create double, then each dollar is worth half as much.
Right.
But that's not true in a fiat currency. A fiat currency money doesn't matter.
It's whatever I write on the bill.
Only real resources and our productive capacity and time matters. That's the only thing that matters.
Okay.
So the phrase that I wanted people to remember, federal taxes. If you don't remember anything else, please just remember this phrase. Federal taxes do not fund federal spending. Federal spending fund federal taxes. Okay. So federal taxes are very important, but not because we need their money. They're really important. So why does the government collect taxes? And number one, we've already spoken about, control inflation. So if there's $10 billion in an economy for ponies in the 2018 Pony for All Act, then clearly 3 days later they'll realize, uh-oh, we can't get this done in a week. This is going to cause hyperinflation. So they tax money back to control that inflation. So they reduce the demand. So that's an extreme situation. But if there's like a disease in farms, and now all of a sudden we can't produce as much corn, but people want as much corn as they did yesterday, then that might be too much demand for our productive capacity to handle. So one way of handling that is to tax that money.
Oh, so then if we put a giant tax on the ponies, now there's a bunch of people that go, well, I don't want one now. I know I can have one, but it's too much, so I don't want one.
Exactly. Or you could that's one way of doing it, and you could also tax the people so they simply have less money to do anything with. So I want a great example, a really great example for emphasizing this is war bonds, World War II. So in World War II, they offered war bonds. Help fund the troops. Help fund the war effort. And we now know that it didn't fund anything because the federal government doesn't need any money. But what it did was all of the resources of car companies went, instead of making new cars, went into tanks and ships and planes and artillery instead. I'm pretty sure this is, if not exactly true, it is extremely close to true that not a single car was produced during World War II. But the money in people's pockets didn't change. So the demand, roughly speaking, the war changed stuff, but roughly speaking, the demand for new cars didn't change. They had the same amount of money in their bank accounts and their investments in their pockets to buy new cars, but now the supply of new cars cratered because all of those resources were going to the war effort. So they offered the American people war bonds. And they said, fund the effort, fund the troops, buy a war bond, give us $1,000 or whatever you want, but let's say $1,000, then we'll hold it for 10 years, use it for the war effort. No, they won't. and we'll give you your money back in 10 years, and we'll give you a 5% bonus. And what that did, the federal government didn't use that money at all. They just wrote down Graham Elwood, $1,000, matures in 2023, 5% interest. They just wrote it down, but they don't use that money for anything. What it did is it removed that money from the economy to reduce demand. Okay? So if you have a question.
I don't have a question, really.
I assume that makes sense.
It makes total sense to me. And it sort of opens up as to why, the more I do this channel, the more I learn. And actually, the more the answers actually become very simple, which is just it's about money and power and control. Like everything that's done is to do that. And so it's like we just need to take the demand out. So the demand for cars out of there and put it, it's mind-boggling in the one sense, and then makes perfect because that's what this.
It's mind-boggling. I think it's mind-boggling because you've been taught opposite world.
Yeah, right. For my whole life, I've been taught.
Right. What it boils down to is that they pretend that the federal government is exactly like you and your household. That's what they do. That's how they trick you. And it's completely has nothing to do with it. But they trick you and they pretend that it is exactly the same. Obama saying, we can't afford it. We have to bring out our credit cards. Credit cards? What does that mean? We have to borrow from China. All of this stuff is pretending that the federal government is exactly like you because you've never been taught what the federal government is like. So you assume that it's just like you.
Right.
Okay, so control inflation. And taxes are very similar to war bonds in the sense that it takes money out of the economy. Except taxes are coercive. They're not voluntary. Taxes aren't just 10 years. They're infinite years. And taxes obviously don't provide a bonus. But otherwise, they're pretty much the same thing. They remove money from the economy. Government doesn't use it in any way, aside from maybe notating how much it was. But they don't use it in any way. Okay, so that's number one. It's controlling inflation. And feel free to interrupt me, if you have any questions. So that's number one. There's two more reasons. Number two is to impose moral decisions. So we as a society decide, and pretending that the government's not corrupt, we as a society decide that we want to not stop people, we want to discourage people from drinking too much alcohol. We want to discourage people from gambling too much, cigarettes too much. We want to discourage people from activities that cause pollution. So we want to tax those activities. We want to tax gambling some, but not completely stop it. We want to tax pollution activities that cause pollution a lot because, we're all going to die because of global, climate change. So it discourages behavior to tax someone. For vices, for behaviors that cause problems for society. So we can raise taxes to discourage those behaviors. And we decide how much we want to raise them. Do we really want to stop it, or do we want to just, slow it down? And income inequality. We can raise taxes on the rich to lower income inequality. So I'll go back to that one in a minute. We can also encourage behavior by lowering taxes. So if people want to buy solar panels for their house,
sure,
we could give you lower your taxes. If you want to buy an electric car, I'm sure there's a million other examples I just can't think of at the moment.
Yeah, I
to
bought
encourage
an electric
behaviors.
car. Yeah, so one of the things I got by buying an electric car was I got a tax break. I can write off some of my money that I brought in because I bought an electric car.
Okay. So encourage behaviors by lowering taxes. And again, you decide how much you want to lower behaviors. Do you want to really make it cheap? You want to just make it a little cheaper, and so on. So income inequality, we want to discourage income inequality at the immoral levels that we currently have. Okay? So we want to tax the rich because it's fine if you want to be rich. There's nothing wrong with being rich. You can be 300 times more rich than everybody else. Whatever we as a society decide is moral. But at some point, it gets to the point where they're getting rich by extracting out of other people's well-being. Okay?
Right.
And we are currently at the state where it is so immoral that they get to buy the politicians with their pocket change.
Right.
And then they create the laws and create a cycle where that becomes easier. So we want to tax the rich because we decide as a society that this level of income inequality is immoral and unjust and wrong, not because we need their money. And that, for me, was a light bulb that we do want to tax the wealthy. We do want to tax the wealthy. We say, you can have $1 billion, you can have $100 million, whatever we as a society decide. But after that portion of it, not all of it, but that portion of it above that immoral boundary that we decide, that's going to be taxed like 90%. And they can cry, oh, 90%, that's so obnoxious. No, we're only taxing the obscene part.
Right.
90%, whatever we as a society decide that is. So that is how we can control immoral levels of inequality, stop them from buying the government, stop them from extracting wealth from others, and so on. But we don't tax the rich because we need their money. And for me, that was a huge breakthrough. That even though I went through all these steps of but everybody talks, even Bernie talks about we need to tax the rich. Let's use it for infrastructure and all this stuff. Tax Wall Street speculation. Raise the cap on Social Security. Yes, we should raise the cap on. We should eliminate the cap on Social Security. FICA tax, which pays into Social Security, helps pay for Social Security, which is nonsense. But FICA pays into Social Security, so we feel invested. And years later, say, "I've been paying my whole life. I don't take my Social Security away." It's complete nonsense. But setting that aside, Bernie Sanders says we should eliminate the cap on Social Security, and we absolutely should, but not because we need the money, because Social Security isn't paid for by taxes. It's not paid for by FICA taxes. FICA taxes just disappear and they go away. They're not used to pay for Social Security simply because of everything we've been talking about. You eliminate the cap on Social Security taxes, not because we need the money, not because Social Security is running out of money, because it doesn't make sense for a federal program to run out of money. That doesn't make sense. We eliminate the cap because it's a regressive tax, that only the powerless are paying that tax. The powerful are not paying that tax. We should really be eliminating that tax for everybody. That's what we should do, because it was a trick to make people feel like they're invested. It is not actually paying for things. There's actually a quote from FDR saying it was just, I did it because there's no way that people are going to take it away from them because they're paying into it, but they're not. So I'm not going to go into Social Security, but that's a really interesting subject. Okay, so we tax the wealthy because it's moral and just and right. We reduce the military. Well, that doesn't really apply to taxes. We'll set that aside from now. But it's moral and just and right, not because we need the money. Okay. So if you have any comments, there's one more reason. There's three reasons.
I think, I'm trying to see if I have any really major comments. I really am just sort of digesting all of this.
I know it's high speed. I know.
But right, it actually all sort of, it does connect and does make sense, since the government is writing its own currency. It doesn't need taxes, but it uses it just more of sort of a moral or ethical guideline, which is why when mainly the Republicans are always like tax breaks for the rich, it just shows you what they think the rich should. They trust that the rich are going to do good with their money, which is not the case.
Right. The rich want to become the government.
Right. Well,
the rich want to eliminate the government and become the government, not just create the law. They actually want government to step out of the way. They want to give us health care because they want to profit off our health care, which makes our laws about health care inapplicable to their private companies. Mm-hmm. They want to get public schools out of the way so they can have private schools, which are no longer susceptible to public records laws.
Right.
So it's not just making money. It's actually getting rid of the government. They want it to just go away so that they become the law in the government. That's how I see it. So, okay. If there's anything else, there's okay. So reason number three, the last one, is to drive the currency and drive the economy. And I know that's meaningless when you first hear that. Taxes drive the currency and drive the economy. And I'll totally explain that. You want to soak that in for a moment?
Yeah, I don't get that at all. I don't.
Yeah.
Okay.
And you shouldn't. We've never been taught it. It drives the currency. It drives the economy. All right. So I'm going to do this with my last analogy, and that is, I'm a father. I have two boys. They're about to be 9 and 12, and they barter and trade with each other. My little one will sneak behind our backs and say to the older one, please do my homework. I'll make your bed for 3 days. My older one will go to the younger one and say, please take out the trash. I'm too busy. I'll give you 30 minutes on my iPad tomorrow. So they barter, they trade. Mm-hmm. And then I come in and I say, guess what, boys? I'm going to give you allowance. And I take out my old boxes of old business cards. And I tell them, I'm going to give you 10 business cards a week for your allowance, both of you. And they look at me like I'm nuts. What do they care? They're like, what? Why? What do I care about your business cards? And I go, well, you can buy things from each other. So instead of, make my bed, I'll do this for you. Make my bed and I'll give you 2 business cards. And they go, why in the world would I want to do that? And I say, you could also buy stuff from me and mommy. You could say, chores, or, can I pay you and I don't have to do this? Or can I pay you and you drive me somewhere or whatever? And I'm like, yeah, sure. And then they say, well, can I go to a store and use this? And no. And they look at me like I'm nuts. Why in the world would they care? Why in the world would they want to do this? And they tell me, I don't want to do this. This is stupid. And then I tell them, you're going to get 10 a week. But every 4 weeks, you have to pay me 15 in taxes. And they look at me like, what in the world are you doing? What are you talking about? And I say, I pay you 10 a week. And then every 4th week, you have to pay me 15 in taxes. And they say, I'm not going to do that. And I tell them, okay, then you will be grounded for a month and you will not have any allowance. And then they tell them, fine, well, then I'm going to go to a copy shop and I'm going to make 1,000 copies of them. And I'm not going to have to worry about this anymore. And I tell them, fine. And then you will be grounded for 6 months with no allowance. And now they care about the money. They care about my business cards because I'm telling them that they have to pay taxes. And if they don't, they go to jail. And if they try and counterfeit them as a currency user, they will go to jail for even longer. And now they care about my money. And now instead of saying, make my bed and I'll do this for you, now instead they say, make my bed and I'll give you 2 business cards. And now they say, let me use my iPad and I'll give you 3 business cards. And now the bartering is discouraged. You can still do it, but it's discouraged because now you will be grounded for 6 months or 2 months, whatever I said, grounded for a month if you don't pay your taxes. So I am now driving the economy. I am now driving the currency. And my children care about the money now because I make them care about the money. I'm not being a jerk. I'm not being unreasonable. I'm not trying to keep them down like you said at the beginning. But I am forcing them to use the currency that only I am allowed to create. Okay?
Right. And now they're beholden to that currency, so they can't just barter. Now they need to go get a job that pays them that currency.
Maybe in addition to allowance, maybe they want to do extra chores. If I do this, can I get a couple extra, whatever. That's true.
Versus, I don't need to get a job if I'm just bartering with you.
Right. But you can't go to Walmart and barter. So bartering is extremely discouraged with taxes. Yeah. So, okay. So I am a monopoly currency issuer. I'm a monopoly currency issuer. They are currency users. They care about the money. What do I care about? Do I care about the money? I care about it from the point of view of controlling the people, but what do I care about it directly? What do I use the money for myself? So let me ask the question again. What do I care about? Because I'll tell you, I don't care about the money.
Well, you care about controlling.
That's part of it.
Yeah.
That's part of it, but there's more.
I don't know what else.
I care about my children's labor. I care about the real resources. So the federal government, the only thing that they care about is the real resources. In this limited example, I can only say labor. The analogy breaks down at that point. But for the federal government, they care about real resources. They don't care about the money. They care about time and people and things in the ground and things that grow. They care about real resources. They don't care about the money, which is another way of saying they're not limited by the money. They are only limited by real resources. So you can create infinite money. I want to emphasize, you can create infinite money if you want to, but it would be foolish to do so without a consideration of your productive capacity, of your real resources.
Oh, going back to the analogy of the ponies.
Exactly.
Right. Oh, that makes total sense. So so I don't care about the money, but I need you, like, let's say instead of 2 kids, I've got 10, and one kid works my garden, brings food out of there, and the other kid milks the cows and then sells that milk, and then another kid builds chairs and sells those chairs to the neighbors, and I get it. That's what I care about. So
exactly.
So
I need things to be done, so maybe I'll give them a couple extra bucks, and maybe I might spend extra into the economy to encourage more production. Maybe I might tax if they're so flush with business cards that I might do some extra taxes for this week because something's out of control or I don't have the time to drive them somewhere or whatever it is. So that's the controlling inflation thing.
Your oldest son can now drive, and you don't want to drive the other kids around, so now you pay your son to drive the other. Yeah.
Right. Okay. So that's that. That's, now we're putting all this together into these real mind benders and it's starting to come together. So that's the end of that. Now we're on to a new subject. And if you want to say something, please feel free.
No, it sort of all makes sense. I mean, a big part of what I do on this show is I always connect the dots. And that's the thing I always try to do when I cover in a story about anything, is sort of connect the dots and show the simplicity of it, because the tactics are, it's control, and I need resources, and I need money and power, which makes perfect sense to why the real reason for fiat currency.
Yep.
If everyone's just out there bartering, then you don't need me. And what do? And I need these resources taken care of, and I need people to do this labor and that thing and get this, build that, and
and we are the richest country in the history of the world, not because of money, but because of the resources available to us, because we lucked out with the land that we have. We killed Native Americans and all that stuff, but we are blessed with the resources that we have. That's why we're the richest country in the history of the world, not because we have a big pile of money.
Right. Because we have the breadbasket of the world, and if this was a desert, if this was like Afghanistan or some country like that was all sand and rocks, we wouldn't have all this.
Right. Okay. All right. So next subject. Sure. So mechanics, and we touched on this, but so how is money created specifically, technically? And we went through this high speed. We went through it backwards. Mm-hmm. So Congress writes a number into a bill, $10 billion for the Pony for All Act of 2018. $10 billion is written in there. And that's how money is born, because they wrote a number into a bill. It's passed into law. That triggers the Treasury to instruct the Federal Reserve to create a new line in a spreadsheet, literally a spreadsheet, at least that's very roughly true. Pony Act of 2018, 10 billion. And then there might be sub ones that break it down for what specific companies need it and so on to make this law a reality. Then that money, based on what, $300 million goes to a breeding company in California. So that portion of it goes to the State Reserve in California, mm-hmm. goes to the Wells Fargo branch that this company has an account in, And then that company is now legally obligated to use that money in order to make this act become law. So all of these companies work together based on what's in this bill to implement the Pony Act. Okay, so same with Medicare for all.
Right.
Same with anything. Same with Medicare for all. Maybe $1 trillion for Medicare for all. It goes into Treasury, Federal Reserve, goes to all these different companies, training for the people that are going to be, the private insurance industry. We need to train them, move them somewhere else, pay them insurance. So that money is going to go to this organization, in this state reserve, in this bank branch, and so on. So it's all the same stuff. Excuse me. So that's how money is, that's the mechanics of how money comes from Congress to the people. And now paying your taxes, what actually happens, mechanics of it now, not why, but the mechanics of it, what happens when you pay your taxes. And so let's say you pay $1,000 in taxes and you pay it in cash. You send in bills. Without exaggeration, without being silly, they shred it. And they actually sell shredded bills as souvenirs. If you pay it, most commonly is paid electronically. And this is not exactly true, but it's effectively true, that when you pay your taxes electronically, what you're doing is you're giving the government permission to reach into your bank account and lower your balance by $1,000. So they're not doing anything with that $1,000. They're simply reducing your money by $1,000, which is no different than taking the score off of the game at the end of the game. It just disappears. So money is born with Congress in a bill, and money dies with taxes. And a temporary death is bonds. It removes money from the economy. It comes back to life with a bond. Okay? I love this. I see the light bulbs going off. This is awesome. If you want to say something, say something. So they keep a record. They keep a record of your taxes. They keep your tax return, so they know how much you paid. But it's not like they have a bank account filled with that money anywhere or a spreadsheet filled with that money anywhere. They just have a record of what you paid in your tax return. That's all they need. That's all the record that they need. So same with Social Security. There's not a bucket of money. You don't steal from Social Security because there's nothing to steal from. Social Security benefits are created each year. So quickly, the Social Security Act of 1935, created the currency through perpetuity, in perpetuity. It gave, and this is not exactly correct, but again, it's close enough. It gave Social Security Administration the currency issuing ability for a very narrow purpose, which is to dole out benefits. So when you hear somebody say, Social Security is running out of money, we need to steal money, or they're stealing money from Social Security, it makes no sense. Because the Social Security Administration pays its benefits by creating the currency each year for each person. So these trust funds that people talk about, there are no trust funds except perhaps in just an accounting point of view. And that's the trick with FICA. They pay FICA and it goes into this trust fund, which does nothing and is not used for anything ever, except for the government accounting office and the governmental accounting office, the GAO.
Yeah.
They put out the estimates after every big bill. The GAO, I think that's what it's called, puts out this big estimate, and that people trust because it's nonpartisan of how the effect of that bill is going to be. But the GAO was told in 1985 in some law with Ronald Reagan that they have to use the terms trust fund and debt and deficit to give the impression that it's going to run out of money in X years, that our debt is spiraling out of control and Social Security is going to run out of money in 2032, and now it's 3 years earlier. And not because they know better, but because the law tells them to, because the Congress put it into law in 1985 to tell them to use these misconceptions to trick people, which is all an effort to privatize. And Right. They say, oh, it's failing, and then 5 years later say, see, it failed, we have to privatize it, now we have to make money. But if you understand the economy, how it really works, there is nothing to steal from Social Security. Social Security will not default by definition because that's what the law said when it was written. And the only way it will default is if our politicians decide for it to default. Okay. So
So basically, they've just like, oh, let's create this political football to kick around.
I mean, any program. I don't know what it's called, the healthcare thing in England. They have free healthcare, but theirs is different because they actually pay the doctors and hospitals. Our Medicare for All wouldn't pay the doctors and hospitals. No, they wouldn't be employees of the government. They would still have private hospitals and private doctor offices. The government would just do the payments. It would take over the insurance industry. In England, the doctors and hospitals are in the government, so that's different. But my point was is that they kill these public programs by defunding,
right,
and then sabotaging, and then a couple of years later pointing back and saying, see, it failed, and now they have to privatize it. That's the excuse for privatizing it. So,
which makes perfect sense.
Yeah, of course. So the federal debt. Federal debt. We are a monopoly currency issuer. What does it mean to be in debt? If we can make the money, if the China, $21 trillion, that silly clock in Times Square. Okay, so we draw a $21 trillion bill on a piece of paper, no more debt. What's the big deal? It's just another trick to make the people feel like there's something bigger out there that makes it so that we're not allowed to have stuff. So the debt, a currency issuer can't have debt. I mean, it can have a number in a bank account, but if we can create Right. So I can't speak too deeply on the debt, so I got to skip over that. But generally, that's true. But the deficit and surplus and balanced budget, I can speak on. The deficit, according to what we're told, according to what we're taught, is irresponsible. The surplus is responsible. The balanced budget is responsible. Bill Clinton left office in and had a surplus, and it was hailed as, oh, he's so responsible. And then a recession hit. Wonder why. So deficit, surplus, balanced budget are all opposite world. They tell us a deficit is irresponsible. They tell us a surplus is responsible. They tell us a balanced budget is responsible. I'm telling you that a balanced budget amendment, which I'm sure you've heard of, talked about, a balanced budget amendment is permanent, would be permanent and devastating austerity. And I want to ask you why. And again, I'll rescue you if you don't,
I don't know.
I mean, that doesn't sound right? Because balanced budget sounds like a good thing.
Right.
But the balanced budget amendment would be permanent and devastating austerity. So a balanced budget, just technically, what is a balanced budget? Not why it would be bad, but what is
a balanced budget? Is you allocated this amount of money for a budget and you stayed within that. You were given, I do a lot of movie review stuff. So let's say it's you gave me $10 million to make a movie, and I got the movie made, and I did not need any more than the $10 million you gave me. That's a balanced budget.
So your income is exactly equal to your outcome.
Yes.
From the federal government's point of view, our outcome is exactly equal to our income. So I spend $100 into the economy as a federal government, and then what do I tax in April next year?
$100.
I spend $100. I spend $100 into the economy. I tax $100 back. Can anyone save? Can anyone spend without dipping into their existing savings, and can anyone invest? No. They can't save. They absolutely can't save. They can't spend unless they dip into their savings or their investments. They can't do anything. So a balanced budget means that the government can do nothing for the people. And you actually railed against PAYGO, or maybe it was Jimmy Dore, railed against PAYGO a few weeks ago.
It was Jimmy.
PAYGO is a balanced budget. We cannot spend the money until we find the money to spend, which we now know at the federal level is utter nonsense. PAYGO is utter nonsense at the federal level. And unfortunately, I hear a lot of stuff all over the place with progressive media. The debt is going to kill the deficit is going through the roof. And that's really why I'm talking to you, which I'm going to get into soon. But you guys all say all of these things. You do everything right. You do everything right, but then you frame it so wrong that perpetuates perpetuates all of these misconceptions and lies, and guarantees we never get the things that we preach for. So a balanced budget, I spend $100 into the economy, I tax $100 back, because that's the responsible thing to do. But now that we know, is utter nonsense. Why would the government need to do that?
Because
it doesn't need any.
Yeah, they can write their own currency.
It doesn't need to do that. Surplus. A surplus. Bill Clinton left with a surplus. What's a surplus? Just technically, what does a surplus mean?
To use the same analogy, you gave me $10 million to make a movie, and I actually got it done for $9 million. So I have $1 million extra dollars surplus that I didn't use.
Right. So from the federal government's point of view, I spend $100 into the economy. I tax back $120. So now people need to dip into their savings and their investments just to pay taxes. So not only can they not spend, they actually lose their value because the government is gouging them. But Bill Clinton was praised because he had a surplus for a couple years. And it's not a coincidence, and I don't know the details, and I'm pretty sure I'm right, not a coincidence that soon followed a recession because of the surplus.
And the reason for that is why? Because we
kept on taking money out of the people's pockets and we weren't doing anything for them. If we don't give, the pony program is $10 billion. We don't tax $10 billion back. They just implemented the pony program, and now we're going to take all that money back that they just used to implement this. That doesn't make sense. We did that because we want everyone to have a pony, a Medicare for all. We spent that money because we want Medicare for all. We didn't spend that money to make Medicare for all, and then we tax all that money back. That they don't make anything out of it. They're doing all their work for free. So the last one is deficit. The deficit is I tax 100. I spend 100 into the economy. I tax back 60. And now the people have savings of 40. So now they can save, now they can invest, now they can spend. So a deficit is a good thing for the people. You might want to change it for the purposes of, all the reasons for taxing, which is especially for controlling inflation. It may not be a good idea to have a deficit, but in many situations, it is a good idea to have a deficit because that puts money into the people's pockets.
I see.
Okay. So a great example, the PROMESA board in Puerto Rico. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Mm-mm.
So the Puerto Rican government was taken over by the PROMESA board because they're not being responsible with their money. They're colonialized. And it's filled with corporate people, profit-wanting people. The PROMESA board, PR Puerto Rico, PROMESA, PROMESA. And this PROMESA board is now the government. The government itself is not allowed to control Puerto Rico. Now the PROMESA board controls Puerto Rico because the government is not responsible for whatever reason. And the only condition, or one of the big conditions at the PROMESA board, and I learned this in Congressional Dish by Jen Briney, awesome podcast. She doesn't know, she's very hip on Pago, and I wrote her about MMT and she wasn't too hip on it. But aside from that, it's an extraordinary podcast, and she did a podcast on Puerto Rico, and one of the conditions that PROMESA board gave to the Puerto Rican government was you can get control back if you're responsible and you have 4 years of balanced budgets. So if you have 4 years of balanced budgets, then you are responsible, and now we can give you control of your government back. So not only are we screwing the people of Puerto Rico now, but you have to screw them 10 times harder for 4 years straight, and then we'll give you control of your government back. So the responsible thing to do, it's all opposite world. Deficit, surplus, balanced budget, it's all opposite world. Yeah, because it actually, if you think about it, it's like you only consider the bank account of the parents. It's like you only care about the bank account of the parents. So a balanced budget, yeah, that's great. A balanced budget, surplus, whatever. But two things. Number one, it makes no sense because the federal government doesn't need income. So that makes no sense to begin with, that you need to be responsible in this way so that I don't spend more than I have. which makes no sense at the federal level. But it also neglects every one of the people, every one of the children in this analogy. Like, if you only care about the parents, you don't care about any of the 320 million children, and you don't care about the country as a whole. And it's nonsense to begin with. So, all right, so on to my last thing. Do you have any statements before I go into this?
Yeah. I'm just taking it off. It's hard. I don't. It's like I don't know what the questions I have are.
I was exactly this way. It's just like all of these, amazing mind-twisting concepts, but none of them are connected yet. It's like really hard to grasp, but I know that this is a big deal. Like at this stage, I knew that this was a big deal, but I had no idea why.
Right.
So, okay. All right. So this last thing, and I'll be honest, I'm not as clear on how I want to present this, but this is where, okay, I private messaged you on Twitter that you inspired me with one of your videos, your Air Force video about your new bomber. And the title of the video was just less than 2 weeks ago. The Air Force's new bomber takes money from schools. That was the name of your video, and you can already see where I'm going. But there's a big deal here. There's a big deal here. Not just saying that's wrong and do better because it do the right thing. I'm saying that there's something much, much bigger here that I'm trying to tell you.
Okay.
So the Air Force's new bomber takes money from schools. Okay. And you said two things specifically. One, the money for these planes could be used for infrastructure, air pollution, homelessness, and so on. And you also said anytime some government official tells you that there's no money for this fill-in-the-blank thing that would make your daily life better, just tell them, let's cut the war budget in half. Okay? So number one, it doesn't make economic sense, and you understand that now, or at least you're beginning to understand that. That doesn't make economic sense to say we should be taking money from the military because we need the money for the powerless. Medicare for all and all.
Right, because we
should be taking.
There's no money to be taken. We can just write more money to pay for all of these things if we wanted to.
Exactly, and the point is not that it's economically wrong. That's not the point. I mean, yes, it's wrong and it needs to be right, but there is something really, really sinister that you are perpetuating because you have been taught to perpetuate it, and TYT perpetuates it. Jen Briney perpetuates it. Kyle Kolinsky perpetuates it. This is the thing that drives me batty because we do everything right. We preach for the right stuff. We want the right stuff. We want it for the right reasons. We understand what the problem is. We understand everything. But then when we go in for the kill to actually get it, we shoot ourselves in the foot. And we go all the way back to the end of the line because we hook these fights together. And what I mean by that is, yes, excessive military, endless war, immoral levels of income inequality, you should fight against them as hard as you can, as much as you do. You should. It is unjust. It is immoral. It is wrong. We should. Oh, but you should not be fighting against them because they're expensive. So you should be fighting against them because they're immoral and wrong and unjust. You should not be fighting against them because they're expensive. Okay, that's part one. Part two. You should be fighting for Medicare for all and a living wage and free college and forgiving student debt and fixing our poisoned water. You should be fighting for that stuff just as hard as you do. You should be just as angry as you are. But you should not be fighting for these things because they're affordable. You should be fighting for these things because they're right and moral and just. And the mistake that the progressive media, and most progressives, it's not just the media, it's most progressives. Nina Turner just did this a few weeks ago in one of her emails. I was really upset because she's one of my idols. But it's not, it's just what she knows. It's not, sinister.
Right.
What is horrible that we have been taught to do and that all you guys do, and therefore you teach all of your viewers, is that we link these fights together. We make the programs for the powerless conditional on wresting money from the rich and the powerful. So we can't get Medicare for all until we reduce the military. We can't get Medicare for all until we tax the rich. And that pits the powerful against the powerless. And we can't get what we need to survive until we wrest it from their cold, dead hands. And that is a fight that the powerless will always lose. And so the most important thing, aside from remembering that phrase way back when, the most important thing, especially as you, who reaches all of these other people, and TYT, who reaches millions of people, and Jimmy Dore, who reaches hundreds of thousands of people, is you should fight just as hard against the society's injustices. You should fight and be just as angry. And you should fight just as hard and be just as angry, righteous anger, about all the things that the powerless need to survive. But you have got to stop linking these fights together. Because linking these fights together, taking money from the rich, taking money from the military in order to pay for programs for the powerless. We should not be funding the military because we want to use that money instead for programs for the powerless. That is what's killing the progressive movement. It's killing the progressive movement. I don't find that to be an exaggeration. We preach everything we preach for. We will never, ever get because we link these fights together and make it a prerequisite to take money from the powerful. And when the economic reality we now know is completely not that.
Right. So the argument should just be because we create our own currency, we could just write a check for $80 billion and everybody has Medicare for all. We can just give that to people. We don't need to take it from somewhere else. We don't need to balance any budgets. Separate from that, we should reduce military spending just because it's immoral and it kills people and ruins lives.
And same with immoral levels of income inequality. Right. We should tax the rich, but not because we need their money. And that's the connection of we have to get money from the rich in order to help the powerless. And the powerless will always, and they have always for 40 years, lose that fight.
Right.
So that's why you and everybody, most progressives, but especially the media who reaches all these people, the truly progressive media, TYT, it really is, it's just so upsetting. My pinned tweet is a big thread about how TYT did this and does this and continues to do this. You link these fights together. We fight 95% of the battle valiantly and amazingly. We preach, we know what's wrong, we know what should be, we know exactly what should be. And then we connect these two things together and say we should be taxing the rich, or the polls say that the people want their taxes used for healthcare. We don't want them used for bombs anymore. Every bomb that's done takes a chicken wing off of a plate of a baby. And all of that stuff links these fights together and pits class warfare. And the powerless will always lose class warfare. What we should be doing is we should be walking onto Congress and demanding Medicare for all. And then when they say, how are we going to pay for it? You say because we want to pay for it and it's moral and right and just. There's a lot of education to get to that point. But we should not be saying stop this military because we need help. I think you get it now. Mm-hmm. So the most important thing is fight the injustices, fight the things we need, but stop linking them together. Stop linking them together. Stop making this, we have to get it from the powerful as a prerequisite to getting what we need. So,
okay. That actually all makes perfect sense. And, literally you show how it's not just 4 decades, it's longer than that. I mean, it's that famous speech by Eisenhower about every bomber could have been a bushel of weed or a school and all this other stuff. And it's a very poetic speech emotionally, and it does show how awful war is. But it does make sense to me as you say this, that it needs to not be connected. It needs to be a separate issue. Now that we know, or as I know, that we're creating our own currency, so we don't need taxes or funding or anything like that.
Right. And it shows, one more very quick analogy, which is this fighting 95%, and then when we go in for the kill, we stab ourselves And so we do everything right except the one final thing that we need to actually get these things. And it's like we're stepping on a rope as we're trying to pull it. That's how I see it. We're pulling a rope and we're stepping on it at the same time. And what it really shows is that our politicians want us to think.
Oh, for sure.
Our politicians want us to think, excuse me, that they believe, that they want us to think that they think that, oh, I wish that you could have Medicare for all. I wish that you could have health care. I wish that you could. I know how much it's important, how important it is to you. I know that you really want it. I know that you deserve it. But unfortunately, we can't because of all this stuff. Deficit, responsible, money. When the truth is that they're using that to hide the fact that they simply don't want to give it to us because they're paid not to. And Medicare for all, this is a very important example for me. They want to profit off of us. That's definitely a big deal. They don't want to give us Medicare for all because they want to profit off of our sickness, which is disgusting and wrong and unjust and all that. But profit is not the only thing. And in fact, in my opinion, it's the second thing. What the top thing, the most important thing to them is that, and Caitlin Johnstone taught me this, power is relative. You cannot stay powerful unless you keep the powerless powerless. You cannot stay in order to stay powerful, you have to actively make the powerless to keep them powerless. Medicare for all chains people to their jobs. So yes, it would be great to give them health care and not to make them profit off of our sickness and suffering. But what I think it's even more for is it chains us to our jobs, because if we left our jobs, we would not be able to afford insurance for our family, and we couldn't run for office and take over their positions. So it is their way of keeping us powerless. Profit is a big deal for them, but in my mind, even more important than that, is their way of keeping the powerless powerless and keeping the powerful powerful.
Well, going back to the top of what we said in the first video, they don't want millions of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortezes running. They don't want that. They got to be like, what the hell? They're looking at her, and they're probably looking at Kenneth Mejia, and who won the primary. He's running against, he top two in California. He's a Green. He's running against a Democrat in the 34th Congressional District in California. And they're probably like, oh, God, we don't want these regular people.
Yeah,
and
the guy who's running against Kevin Yoder, who TYT subscriber, he's the same thing, and he's polling 7 points ahead of the Republicans. So the Democratic Party put in a corporatist to try and cut him off at the pass, kind of thing. Yeah, I mean it's very clear now that they don't want Bernie Sanders and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. They would rather a Republican, because even though a Republican would do horrible stuff, he wouldn't do anything that hurts the pocketbook.
Nope.
Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and me and you and Bernie Sanders would destroy their pocketbook.
Yeah.
So that's why they stop us. They would much rather Trump than Bernie Sanders.
Oh, easy.
Yeah, yeah. So my goal is, I hope that we can work our way towards teaching Jimmy Dore. We could work our way to getting this into the minds of TYT and Jen Briney and stuff. Be skeptical and do your homework and make sure and all that stuff. But that's my goal, because the truly progressive media is killing the movement. Not because they're doing something different than anybody else, but they're just perpetuating it. And they have the ears of millions and millions of people. Jimmy Dore has actually shown some signs of modern money in the past couple of weeks. He said he was going to talk to Stephanie Kelton. I haven't seen that. But he's actually said stuff. We make our own money, so we have to deficit spend when there's a crisis. And that's like, whoa, where did that come from? So I think he's starting to show hints of it. But
well, look, thank you for coming on the show, Jeff, and thank you for doing this. I really appreciate it. I like having my eyes opened. I like learning the reality of things, especially things that are just ingrained in me and for my whole life, and it's been entrenched in America's for well before I was born. So it's what I love about this show, and the for the Patreon level. So many Patreon supporters have come on and educated me about something I didn't understand, and this is pretty huge. So I encourage everybody out there watching to go do your own research, go to find information from Stephanie Kelton, read watch that video, the Angry Birds one that you said.
Angry Birds and Deficits by Stephanie Kelton is a great starting point.
Yeah. And I hope these two videos have opened people's eyes up, and I love these discussions, and there really isn't anything for me to debate, really. I'm just like, wow, I'm just taking it all in. So I appreciate, I appreciate the constructive criticism on myself and other like progressive media people, because we do need to get our message as informed and as concise as possible. That's what we're all about. We're all about the truth anyway. So yeah, I hope this does. I'll bring it up to Jimmy and anyone else that I can, and I hope other people watch these videos.
Well, I'm really grateful. I appreciate you allowing me to criticize you in that way. It obviously took a long time to really be able to, say it in a way that you would be able to understand, because we had to undo all that stuff and all that. I'm really grateful, and I would love to, your viewers, you want to learn, get in touch with me, Citizens Media TV on Twitter or Facebook. I would love citizensmediatv@gmail.com. I would love to teach you. This is what it's all about for me. Because if we can reach the powerless and teach them in this way, especially the leaders who reach other people like you, that's how we're going to get stuff. That's how we'll actually get stuff.
I love it, man, because that's what I'm about. I tell everybody watching this show, you're a political vigilante. And I always tell people, get involved on a local level and get involved in your local politics and school board and all that stuff, and get educated. And what you're doing here, Jeff, is educating a lot of people to shift their thinking. I think a lot of us came into this progressive side because we had to shift our thinking on the two-party system. That this party's better than that party and all this other stuff, where now we get to see, oh, wait a minute, the whole system is rigged, and this is a huge piece of the whole system's rigged. I mean, a huge
It's just
piece.
as profound. It's just as profound as what Bernie Sanders taught us, which is money in politics is the root of all evil.
Yeah.
And this shows us why we don't have that stuff.
Right.
Modern money, MMT, modern monetary theory shows us why we don't have any of that stuff.
Well, thank you so much for being on the show, and thank you to everybody who's watching. Please hit Jeff up at Citizens Media TV at all the places he just listed, and ask him questions and do your own research and come to your own conclusions. But this is probably going to change a lot of things for me and how I talk about stories that I'm covering.
I am really glad to hear that. And you were very patient. I know this was long, but as I told you, I think it's worth it.
Sweet.
So I appreciate it.
All right. Thank you, Jeff. And thank you everyone out there for making Gotham great again.